Hello, welcome to a bonus episode of the Ask podcast. It is just Mr. Mark Till and I today, whilst the lovely Year 12s are doing their UCAS exams. So we have gone rogue. We are trying to record this independently, so it could be a complete disaster, but we hope that you'll bear with us and we'll have an audio track by the end of this, and we'll have fancy music on either end, and it'll just be as if Tom was here and it's all perfection. So we're doing something slightly different today. We're going to have a look at sort of texts that have inspired us, those that have got some kind of cross-curricular interest for us. So they're not just English related, even though we love to talk about English in the English department at John Hampden Grammar School, of course. But we are also fascinated by a number of other subjects. Now, Sir has decided to challenge me by giving me a book title that he wants to talk about that I'm going to struggle over valiantly here and hopefully get it right. So I think it's called Gödel, Escher, Bach by Douglas Hofstadter. Do you want to kick us off and tell us why you wanted to talk to us about this then, Sir?
Yeah, well, I like this idea of cross-curricular. It's why we started the podcast in a way, isn't it? So we could have colleagues here from other departments, ironically, given it's just the two of us today. But that's the idea, that actually the links between subjects are often just as interesting as the subjects themselves, or develop them. And this always reminds me of actually another novel by Hermann Hesse, German writer, who writes a novel called The Glass Bead Game. The very final thing he writes. And the Glass Bead Game imagines a future society in which little enclaves of scholars have holed themselves up in castles and sort of university ivory towers. And they play this game in the novel called The Glass Bead Game. And you never quite find out what the rules of the Glass Bead Game are.
Sounds like Mornington Crescent.
But it's about scholars and academics almost trying to find universal truths that bridge and cross subjects. So it's almost as if each subject is a bit of a window on the world, but each subject actually is trying to get at the same thing, which is a sort of absolute truth, a kind of absolute hidden meaning to the life of things in the universe. And so playing the Glass Bead Game means finding these profound connections across and between disciplines. And I think if there's any writer or any thinker who, in our own time, because he's still alive, Douglas Hofstadter, would win the Glass Bead Game, it would be Douglas Hofstadter, who writes amazingly about the connections between different areas. So he starts off, he's very interested in artificial intelligence, machine learning, but cognition generally, and theory of mind, and philosophy, and related areas. And he's most famous for Gödel, Escher, Bach, in which he takes three thinkers, so the mathematician, Gödel, famous for his incompleteness theorem, and M.C. Escher, who's the wonderful artist whose posters of his work are often up in maths classrooms. They were when I was at school. There were M.C. Escher pictures, and he does sort of logical drawings that are often either present a logical paradox or something interesting with geometry. And then Bach, the composer Bach, and finds maths in the music. And so the book is a work of non-fiction, but split into tiny chapters that are just discursive little sketches. He riffs on Alice in Wonderland. He has dialogues between characters from Alice in Wonderland talking about some particular issue. And the whole thing really ends up being an experiment in how you can make links between music, maths, logic, Buddhist philosophy. He talks about how a lot of the ideas in Zen, a sort of Zen koan, which is a sort of a strange saying in Buddhism that tries to get you out of logical ways of thinking, how that relates to some of what Escher's trying to do, how that relates to sort of Gödel's incompleteness theorem, for a reason that I might go into, or maybe it's really, really dull to go into, but anyway, and does it with such kind of panache and wit. I think that's the thing. He's such a witty writer and finds connections between these things in a way that is completely playful. So he loves puzzles and anagrams and jokes and puns, but on quite a high level. So what I'm saying is that for students who might be interested in either the arts or the sciences, he's a brilliant writer that shows you how you can, what you know is actually very relevant in disciplines that you might not think that it's going to be relevant in. But in general, he's a wonderful man, Douglas Hofstadter. I think a real humanist and a real someone who I think thinks very deeply about human problems. He writes another book all about translation, because he loves language too, and he speaks a number of languages, and wrote a book about the philosophy of translation, and he called it Le Tombeau de Marot, and that in itself, as a French phrase, is a sort of pun and has a number of meanings. On the one hand, that can be the book of Marot, who's a poet from the 17th century, whose poem he translates. And also another way of saying that is the tomb of my Rose, and his wife died while he was composing it. And the poem's about someone who's ill and sort of love's ill. And he writes this amazingly poetic book about philosophy of translation and about machine learning and about dealing with grief. And he gives you all of those things together. Yeah. So I had a couple of years in my life when I just read him obsessively and just thought he was the most fascinating person. And if you haven't heard of him and you're listening to this, I would utterly recommend searching out his books and articles and YouTube lectures and things, because he is genuinely cross-curricular and very, very interesting.
All right, I shall take that as an order. My brother has often tried to get me to read and delve into, so I shall take that as a recommendation and an order, and definitely look further into that. Why do you think it is then? Because particularly I'm interested in this idea of the connection between music and maths. They're just not natural bedfellows. Shout out to one of my year 11s, George, who is actually taking maths and music, but on the surface of it,
importantly,
and English, which I'm very excited about. But on the surface of it, they just seem, particularly, in lots of schools, we don't seem to understand that those things can mesh together. Why is that?
No, I don't know. There's a great the comedy writer Aaron Sorkin, chap who wrote The West Wing and various things, has a line in a play that he wrote about the invention of television. And it's just a throwaway line, but I've always remembered it. He said, music is what maths does on a Saturday night. I think you can come into different subjects at different levels. And I think what he's getting at there is that music is basically maths in time. It's maths in the same way that geometry is sort of maths in 2D space, and to some extent astronomy is maths in space time. Music is just maths in time. It doesn't exist kind of physically in space, but the sounds kind of count out the duration of time and make melody that way. And so I think with the Bach, so the Bach bit of Gödel, Escher, Bach is a way of saying that a lot of the fugues that Bach wrote have in them what you can almost analyse as, in maths, it would be something like recursion, where you can take an equation and generate from it results that create sort of infinite patterns.
I'm nodding sagely as if I know exactly what you're talking about.
If our maths colleagues are listening to this, I do apologise. Mr. Barnes is listening, I apologise. But things like fractals, for example.
Yeah, okay, those I know.
Yeah, exactly. So fractals, which are obviously shapes that, as it were, replicate almost kind of genetical or mimetic replication. And so the same shape has within it the continuance of its own shape, and so it can infinitely recur and make beautiful geometric patterns. There's a sense that in music you might get the same thing. So you get a theme and then you get variations on that theme that create a kind of mathematical patterning and recursion that you could analyse mathematically, or that the brain just recognises in a piece of music as something that's harmonious and something that for some reason is satisfying. So I think that's the difference between harmony and discord in music, is something about mathematical neatness
and symmetry as well. That idea of the beauty of symmetry, and that we see, when we see in people have got the perfectly symmetrical faces. We find more appealing.
We hate them. We hate them deeply.
We envy them greatly.
But absolute symmetry. But you take it too far, and it would become monotonous. It would literally be a metronome. So I think there's that tension in music between the monotony of a regular beat and variation. And I think that's a real tension in life. I think that's the tension between order and chaos generally. That we like order, but we don't like too much order. And we like chaos, but too much chaos is meaningless. Absolutely. And so music, I think, treads the line between things being ordered and things being unpredictable.
Yeah, I think jazz in particular really represents that idea, doesn't it? Because, even I love someone like an Ella Fitzgerald just going off and have a gorgeous sort of session of scat singing. Sometimes she even forgot the lyrics to her own songs and just went off. But as long as she came back to that theme, if she'd have just gone off forever, it would have lost you. But there was always a sense of returning to the original, returning to the chorus, to the theme. So it had that satisfaction, that ability to take shelter in the order and not get entirely lost in the chaos. Because I guess we can't operate in a world of pure chaos. We would be it would be too much for all of us, I think.
Yeah, that's true. No, she does that wonderful version of Mac the Knife, doesn't she?
Exactly.
Where she just forgets the lyrics and then she just improvises amazingly. She does things like, "You won't recognise it. It's a surprise hit," and that's wonderful.
Yeah,
off the
and
cuff
her
lyrics.
Imitations of you can tell that Sarah and I have some shared musical interests, as well as, of course, literature interests.
So what's your if we're thinking cross-curricular, what stands out for you as interesting? What do you like reading?
I've got a huge number of candidates. I found it really, really hard to break it down. I think most recently the thing I've read that I found had a profound effect on me was The Milkman by Anna Burns, that won the Booker Prize, or the Man Booker Prize as it's known these days, back in 2018. And it was chosen for my book club that I do independently. It was really interesting because it was such a Marmite book, because some people really just didn't get it. But I just found, similar actually, it just had an incredible poetry, like the voice that comes through is so unique and interesting, and some people found it too much to follow because it was so sort of choppy, kind of Virginia Woolf-like in the way it chops around. But it was the way she came at such a difficult subject, because she's a Northern Irish writer, so the Troubles is ever there. It is, there's quite a lot of it that is set in the 70s, but it's not here is the conflict, here is the men fighting the conflict. It was a lot more about the women in the conflict, and particularly about one specific unnamed girl who's just called the middle sister throughout, which is one of the things I love about it. And it's her first person perspective describing what her life is like and how it's impacted by something that's totally out of her control. Because this man, known as the Milkman, who's not even a milkman, he's actually clearly some kind of IRA type terrorist, but he's known as the Milkman, and he's a predator. But there's nothing she can do about it. It's about her powerlessness in the time that she's living in, the situation she's living in. She's the one who becomes guilty just by the mere him approaching her on a road several times. All the rumour mill starts up, and she becomes, it essentially destroys her reputation. And there's no physical, that's the thing about it, there's no physical touching at any point. Like, it's purely this just insidious sense of he'll keep inviting her, and like, you just have a lift in the van. He'll go running with her uninvited, and slowly is like suggesting things that she should and shouldn't do. And it just generally, it kind of breaks down her character over time. It ends okay, guys. It's fairly brutal in places, but without spoiling it too much, something happens with the Milkman that you find quite early on. But it's just this idea of, many people have talked about and written about the impact of the Troubles in terms of the conflict and the deaths in the conflict, particularly the men fighting. But it was just really interesting to see it from a more female perspective, and how an ordinary, intelligent teenage girl, by just trying to have an individuality and a personality, just finds she can't. Like, everybody, even her best friend, essentially, just is like, what are you doing? And it's just this fascinating exploration of what it means to be a woman, and what it means to be human, and what it means to have your individuality and your ability to express yourself completely sort of just almost destroyed to the point of destruction.
So I haven't read it, but I've read extracts from it.
Yeah.
We've used extracts from it, haven't we, in A-level English literature? And it seems that's it, that it's so much about that almost stream of consciousness style voice of that individual character, that it focuses, when there are great historical forces or great political forces, that often they can overwhelm individuals. But I guess literature keeps coming back to the individual consciousness, and how actually all of our experiences of the world are fundamentally subjective. That even if we're caught up in great historical events, you might write really stereotypically about the Troubles, because as soon as you say the Troubles and you say Northern Ireland at that time, you have certain images that you think. You don't think about one particular teenage girl who is being sort of sexually harassed, manipulated. So there's a wonderful sense of avoiding the cliche of the Troubles, but actually for all that, probably making it more vivid and more personal than ever.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I've even heard the author talk about the fact that she tried it with names, she tried it with specifics, and she said it just didn't work. It was better when she would call people renouncers if they wanted to renounce the state. And she like all these kind of code words. It reminded me of some ways like of Clockwork Orange, that it felt like in some ways you had to piece together a new language in order to get to what was actually going on. So it had that slightly totalitarian edge of the idea of language being subverted and manipulated and destroyed, and you having to kind of put it all back together, which I really loved. And there was just one moment that I think summed up the whole book and the brutality, where the way that kind of history met the novel. And this was a true thing, because I did look it up because I thought this can't possibly happen, because maybe I should have gone into some basics first, but essentially the side that are essentially, they want the British out. So they're in the Northern Ireland side, they want the British out, they want Ireland to be a united Ireland, essentially. And they've got these British troop presence that they essentially control the police. No one wants to go anywhere near the police. They do not trust them. That's the worst thing you can possibly do. And there's a sense of constant kind of tit for tat type retaliations. And there's a point where they realise that this side of the argument have their dogs trained so that they will basically bark if any of the police or any of the army are likely to be coming past. Right. They trained them to react to that. And over time, they seem to actually have an affection for their dogs and so on. And then just one evening, there's just this shocking description of where every single dog in the entire region, basically, in the entire of these several streets where the conflict was really concentrated, every dog has been killed, and they've cut the throat of... Sorry, this is a bit brutal. I almost feel like I should have given a trigger warning to this. They've killed every single dog in the whole thing, and they've piled them all up as a warning. And just the power of that moment. I don't know why, for some reason, just the fact there was dogs almost made it more impactful, because you just thought the absolute callousness to be able to do that, to use that just to send a message to say, you're not going to get around us. We are going to take away your warning sign. We are going to kill your valued pets, was just a moment that has really, really stuck with me since I read it, and just incredibly powerful and brutal. And yeah.
I'll have to add this to my to-read list. I've read some extracts of it, and a number of people have mentioned how powerful they've found it. It's cropped up on a number of people's things that they've recommended, or I've seen it in a couple of people's emails, signatures. I'm currently reading.
Yes.
So I'll have to, that's one I'll have to
get
a copy of.
Absolutely. No, and I think those of you who are thinking about taking A-level, it's one of those ones that is a perfect extract for the political and social protest module.
Yeah.
And it's just, I love that module so much, actually. I know this is not a school promotional podcast, technically speaking, but I really think that's one of the things I love about A-level, is that the reading around just so many fantastic novels into 1984 and so on, all of which have that sense of speaking to humanity and what it means to be human, but making connections to history, to philosophy, to psychology, of course, and so on. So I think that one's a pretty good one to start with, but there's lots of other directions you can take it in. And I should also say these are available in our LRC. Those students that are listening. The Milkman, we recently got a copy. I don't know if we've got Gödel Escherbach. We will have to purchase a copy, perhaps. If
absolutely. Well, I'm wondering about starting a competition for the sixth form.
Oh, nice.
Called the Glass Bead Game.
Oh, yeah.
Actually play the Glass Bead Game and have somebody come up with a presentation or an essay or a piece or something where they have found themselves, through their own thinking, a really interesting connection between different domains, maybe between different A-levels, between different topics, and they present on that really interesting connection. And we call it the Glass Bead Game, and maybe you could win I don't know. I feel there needs to be a big prize.
You love big prizes.
I love big prize. I had like £100 or something.
Wow.
Well, you know, you've got to excite people, haven't you? And I find people are excited by money. So maybe that, or maybe £100 worth of Douglas Hofstadter books or something. Or
Goodness me.
Alan has too. I don't know, but something. But I might.
High stakes.
Maybe we do a competition.
High stakes. You've heard it here first, guys. That's very.
Because I really want to reward people that do take a sort of diverse range of A levels as well. Because I do think, like you mentioned George doing maths and English and music. I think that's a wonderful combination of subjects to do. I think I do worry that some people pigeonhole themselves in the curriculum, and they think, oh, I'm this kind of person, and they shut themselves off from different subjects. And I think on a certain level, if you're interested in ideas, I find it impossible to think that I'd just be interested in English because that's the subject I teach. You know,
Yeah.
Science, so many things in science I think are fascinating. When I talk to Mr. Dunn in the staff room or crossing the quad or something, and he probably gets very bored because I fire very ignorant questions at him about quantum mechanics or something. But to be interested, I think, is not to confine yourself, and doing a range of things, I think must be much more satisfying as an A-level student.
You'll be proud of me, sir. I did manage chemistry AS level in my time.
That's true. I ended up doing maths AS level.
Oh, there we go.
I think you need a bit of breadth as well, and you need to. I think those who are more, students who do take arts and humanities subjects, I think having a science is really valuable. And I think those who are more think they're on the science side, have a fourth or have a third if you can. That's something a bit different. I think it keeps you broad, keeps you interested, and I would. I'd recommend that. I think people don't think about that enough when they choose their A-levels.
Fair enough. That's our public service announcement.
That is absolutely.
Do you have a final text that you want to discuss, or a further text cross-curricular wise that you'd like to throw into the mix in particular?
Ooh, cross-curricular.
Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here.
You want to put me on the spot a bit? Do you know what I was actually thinking Shakespeare and mental health.
Okay, right.
Just really,
now you're in my wheelhouse.
I could do so much on this. One of the things that I think is so interesting about Shakespeare and teaching, because we teach Macbeth every year, obviously, and I find with Macbeth and other Shakespeare texts, it doesn't matter that you do them every year, because every year you do it, it's like starting it again. Psychologically, it's like starting it again. And what's been fantastic is that I have shared a Year 11 class this year with Dr. Estridge, who of course also teaches psychology, and she's very much helped us to explore the psychological side of Macbeth's character and looking at Freudian ideas beneath the surface, what we might infer about his deeper motivations. But Shakespeare generally, when you read his plays, you see that he's writing about mental health in so many of those plays centuries before people had articulated theories of mental health.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons that he just saw things so clearly, and I think he saw human psychology so clearly. He doesn't give it the technical names that psychoanalysis and theories of the unconscious mind, subconscious mind would later give it, but it's there. Hamlet, I think ultimately Hamlet is a study of a manic depressive, and I think King Lear is really a study of somebody who has what we now call dementia and Alzheimer's. And those symptoms are the characteristic symptoms. You could almost diagnose King Lear. And Shakespeare's doing this before we had a language or a clinical directory of those things. He's writing at a time when medicine was basically superstition. It was leeches and the black medicine and all kinds of strange things that you push into strange orifices and to try and cure you, and people were never cured. And yet he very, very I think perceptively noticed things like that. And again with Macbeth and what happens when you try and repress guilt, and it bubbles up into madness and hallucinations and strange dreams. And so that's always interested me about Shakespeare, that I think we talk an awful lot now about mental health, and I think Shakespeare was dramatically, as in through drama, I think he was articulating that 400 years ago.
Doing it before it was fashionable.
Doing it absolutely before people talked about it. He was talking about it.
Absolutely.
He was staging it. So that's one of the reasons people say, what's so good about Shakespeare? I think still those characters are really interesting studies about psychological phenomena that you find now and that still impact our lives now.
Well, I'm always up for a Shakespeare discussion, sir.
I thought you'd like that one.
No, I'm quite pleased with that. No, I agree. I think if you're missing I had some brilliant essays about the kind of bloodlust and that repressed bloodlust, you know, with Macbeth, and that all the warning signs are there, that he's gleefully unseeming from the nose to the chops, that idea, it tells you straight away that actually he's got that underlying sort of need to satisfy, and that's such a fascinating idea, that someone can have that dark side. And I remember we had lots of conversation in my class about the nature of evil, and can someone be inherently evil? And obviously we could have, we haven't got time really, but I think we could have a further conversation about Frankenstein's monster, and about, you know, the nature of, are we born pure, are we blank slates, are we genetically determined, how far is our environment? We have still not solved that. My year 9, we are still, that debate rages, and I think it will rage. It will just keep raging, and it's fascinating. So I'm glad that we've got these links between science, English, maths, music, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And literature, one of the functions of literature, I think, people think, it's stories, it's make-believe, it's fiction, is that it gives you examples and allusions and specific character types, archetypes. It gives you a language to talk about some of the scientific and psychological issues. So you can talk about, as soon as you say Frankenstein's creature, you know what we're talking about, and so it helps you, I think, to illuminate some of these subjects. The frames of reference and so on. Brilliant. I wish we could talk forever, but unfortunately, I think Sarah's teaching period 5. So it's time to say goodbye. But of course, thank you to Sarah for being here, and thank you for Tom for not getting grumpy with us. I'm just anticipating he's not going to get grumpy with us for, trying to do it ourselves. Hopefully this is recorded. Yeah. But of course, do make sure, if you haven't already, follow us on Twitter at JHGS English. That would be absolutely fantastic. And the school Twitter at JHGS HW as well would be brilliant. Subscribe. We're getting lots more people subscribing on our YouTube channel, which is under my name, Jenny with an I Summers. And just follow and listen and share it with your friends and your loved ones and so on. Absolutely, and we'll be back with students when they're not doing exams. Yes, very soon. How inconvenient, sir! Doing exams, trying to get ready for uni. So selfish when they've got a podcast. So inconsiderate. But thank you very much. I hope you've attained some secret knowledge today with the Ask podcast. Maybe had a bit of an insight into some of the teachers at the school. And I will just say goodbye. Have a lovely week and talk to you soon. Bye.